Hello, everybody. It's been a pretty hectic, I would say, few weeks, particularly the last 3 weeks. I would say, with obviously, or even 4 weeks with the U.S. Open being pretty intense day in day out. Then we had maybe the Davis Cup, and then of course we had the Federer bombshell about 10 days ago, and then it was just certainly on the channel at least it was constant, but I think it was fairly constant and fever pitch by Friday, of course. And I know we're going to talk about Daniil Medvedev. We're going to give him plenty of airtime. It's been a while since he had that, I suggest. But I think it's impossible not to start, bearing in mind it's now Monday morning after the weekend's events, with a little bit on just what happened over the weekend with Laver Cup. In fact, I'm just going to show you this tweet, ladies and gentlemen, from that's another tweet. I'll come to that in a second. It's a very funny one, and we will highlight it. But I'm going to come to this tweet first of all from Medvedev a couple of days ago. Let me just turn off. I've got my YouTube on somewhere. Hang on. So I apologize for that. Okay. So, yeah, back to this tweet anyway from Medvedev at the weekend. It's tough to imagine. Hopefully, I'm showing the right screen. Yes, I am. Yeah, it's tough to imagine without this tennis legend. What an amazing career when you look into the stats, the numbers, the titles. It's like accomplishing the impossible. Good luck with your next chapter, Roger. So that's nice that Medvedev sent that tweet. What are your thoughts on the weekend, Srihari, as a whole?
It was really special for tennis fans as a whole. I don't think anybody would really disagree with that because whether we like all of the players or some of the players or not, they've just really defined men's tennis this entire millennium so far, I would say. It's just see them share that camaraderie between them, and as Casper Ruud mentioned, they shared quite a few inside jokes as well amongst the amongst the four of them. You wouldn't. I remember, I think it was Novak, maybe 10 years ago. He said that one day when the four of us retire, maybe we'll be at a bar and talk about our all of our classics and probably laugh about some of our matches as well. And I think maybe we sort of got a glimpse into that, with through pictures only, of course. I wish all of us, I mean, all of us would wish we were a fly on the wall, when these guys were having dinner together at these parties and all of that. But yeah, I think what made it even more special is that Federer was calling time on his career at the same time, and I think for him the stage could not have been better to, really bring the curtains down on his illustrious career with three of the most important players in that he has faced in the couple of decades that his career has spanned, or even more. Especially Novak and Rafa, because these two are the players who really, amongst the three of them at least, they really pushed one another to glory. And I think without if I, for Roger, without maybe Rafa or Novak, I don't think he would have had too much of motivation to continue beyond maybe 33 or 34. And the fact that he was putting himself in a position to win Grand Slams and even won three of them past 35 years of age, I think that's mostly due to the fact that he was inspired by these guys who kept pushing him and also kept halting him for a very long time. It was Rafa during his prime, and then once Roger sort of hit his sort of second prime, I would say, because he was playing some amazing tennis for 3 to 4 years, from 2015 all the way to, I would even say, 2019, where he almost won Wimbledon. If it was not for these two guys, I don't think he would have had nearly as much motivation. So for him to have them while he's retiring, have his, along with his family and wife and children, I think that is really special. I think it moved all of us, regardless of whether or not we're his fans. And as someone like myself, who as an ardent Djokovic fan, and initial years of my me following tennis, I disliked Federer quite a bit. So even for me, I was moved. Obviously, I warmed up to him later, from I think 2015 or 2016. I started to appreciate him even more, and especially when his relationship with Novak got better, it was easier for me to just appreciate him and also uh, not really root against him as much as I did before that. So I think, regardless of our allegiance, so to speak, I think it was just really special to witness what we witnessed, and also, those exchanges they had during the TV changeovers. One coaching the other and giving their
Hmm.
tips. Especially for me, what stood out was Novak. Uh, uh, you know, Giving really needful tips to Roger and Rafa, and then they go on to break and win the first set in their doubles match on the first day. That really stood out. You had that picture of him talking to both of them, looking at him, and I think it's probably the picture of this century easily, at least as far as men's tennis is concerned. So uh, this tournament's so unique in that way. We get a lot of content. That it's so
Yeah.
wholesome to see them uh, play for the same team for a change, because we've just been so
Is it
used to
is it
seeing them.
real? Is it a real competition? That's the only thing. Sometimes Srihari, when I hear comments like in the build up when Roger was saying something along the lines of, "Well, I've got to talk to Bjorn first. Yes, it would be nice to play with Rafa. I've also pulled out the singles. I asked the Lever Cup if that was okay." We all know the answer to all of the above questions.
Exactly.
It's yes, yes, and yes again.
Exactly. Yeah. So, yeah, in competition, yeah, that aspect is largely overlooked. Sometimes it tends to get intense, especially I remember the first edition where Kyrgios had match points against Federer in the singles match to take it to a deciding doubles match where they play a set, if I'm not wrong. And he lost that, and you can see him like on his knees, and he's crying. I think that's where, okay, and nobody really cared about that because we got one of the most iconic pictures then with Rafa climbing on top of Roger, and like they're hugging each other, and then like even 5 years after that event, you have people on Twitter having that as their profile picture. It's that iconic. And I think that is where more than just a competition, and that I think that's sort of in a way a bit forced by Team World, I should say, the whole competition aspect. I mean, there is some banter from Team Europe, like how Berrettini mentioned when he was with Novak during the practice, because I remember Felix was practicing. He was like, "Oh, Team World is practicing. We don't really like that." That's fun banter, but I think for Team Europe, it's mostly a bonding experience, and they just gain a lot of memories that they would cherish forever, and
So of
especially
course,
for us fans.
Of course,
That's just
Medvedev, of course, he's the main subject for today. I'm really pleased that we did that Lever Cup thing. I think we had to, but Medvedev, of course, wasn't at the Lever Cup this year. But I mean, he did send that nice tweet, of course, and him and Roger's careers did sort of slightly overlap. I mean, really, Medvedev's career in terms of frontline tennis, if you like, began in 2019, and I think
yes.
they played each other at least once that year, didn't they?
Yeah, in Miami.
Miami, exactly.
That was where
So
the picture was from on his tweet.
yeah, exactly. I guess that. Yeah. So is that their
Yeah.
only meeting?
Oh, they met twice before in 2018. I think just 1 week after the other. It was Shanghai and then Basel.
Okay.
They met in the second round of Shanghai. That was a close match. Federer won 6-4, 4-6, 6-4. And then the
Okay.
Basel match was just a wipe. And that was Federer's only straight set win that entire week. And he was match points away from winning it 6-1, 6-1, but ended up winning
Oh.
it 6-1, 6-4. Yeah,
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was. And I remember that pretty famously because Google just glitched and it ended the match at 6-1, 6-1, but the match was actually still going on, and Federer failed to serve out the match on the first time of asking. And yeah, I didn't really watch that, but I was quite surprised because Medvedev had beaten Tsitsipas just before that, and he gave Federer a run for his money in Shanghai. And Federer was playing. I think it's probably one of his worst title runs, if we could say, because I think he was rusty all week. Oh yeah, actually his final was also in straight sets against Marius Kopil, but again, it was not far from straightforward there. And he was rusty against Krajinovic, against Simon. So yeah, it was not really a great week for him. So I think that was a pretty big missed opportunity for Daniil there. But yeah, and to be fair, I'm not going to take those wins away from Roger because that's when Medvedev really started asserting himself in men's tennis. He won Tokyo just before Shanghai. He qualified through that tournament and he won. and he was playing good tennis against him in Shanghai, and he finished number 16 in the world, and he was playing pretty well. Even the Australian Open, he pushed Novak in the fourth round, and so yeah, sure, he wasn't at his peak of his abilities, but I still think Federer earned those wins. And it would have been really interesting to see Federer face the version of Medvedev towards the end of 2020,
Yeah.
because Medvedev had beaten the entire top 10 except for Federer, because
Hmm.
he didn't play Federer at the time. So I just wish we got
Yeah.
that match, because I think Medvedev definitely would have had a chance.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. 2019 Medvedev is very different, or latter 2019 Medvedev is very different to pre 2019 Medvedev. By the way, just before we do move on, I've got to highlight this tweet. We mentioned the wholesomeness and the lovely things going on Twitter. Certain, Nadal fans saying nice things about Djokovic. Nadal himself tweeting Idemo on Saturday night when Djokovic won. Also, Djokovic fans being very deferential for Federer, and just a lot of love, let's say, with
Yes.
just almost. But I completely agree with what Scott says. He says he gives it until the end of Monday until Djokovic and Nadal fans are back to
Yeah,
arguing about
Scott
each
just
other.
puts out some of the best tweets, I must say. I hope if he's watching this, I hope he hears it. Because
If
there was
he
also
doesn't,
the other
I'll
tweet
mention
about
it.
Bjorn Borg, which maybe he's not seeing heaven for, but it was amazing. Uh, but this tweet I definitely agree with, because
Me too. Me too.
like I mentioned, there are already some tweets from Novak fans and Rafa fans already.
Yeah,
With
yeah. I've seen one or two, and that they'll
yeah, I
creep back
just
into
maybe I'm
normality.
still on the Labor Cup high, then it's easier for me to ignore those tweets, but it still exists. Even during the Labor Cup, there were some who were shading Novak, shading Rafa, and
Yeah, a
it's
little
been
bit. Yeah,
unnecessary. Like, how do you find a way to be toxic even during such a
I know.
special moment for
I know.
men's tennis? So
But
people are
anyway,
gonna
don't
be
worry.
that way.
Don't worry. Normal toxic Twitter will be returning within hours, if not already. Listen, let's get back to Medvedev, though. It's my
Sure.
fault for digressing. Um,
Well, that's fine.
there's so much really to think about with him, and him, particularly this year. Obviously, he won the US Open in just over a year ago, and things
Mhm.
couldn't look any better. But I would say perhaps things started to unravel even before the Australian Open. He had the ATP finals, which he got to the final at. I must admit, I thought he was going to beat Zverev in that final, and was kind of surprised. He seemed a bit flat that day. He just didn't seem to compete that well. What did you think about that ATP finals a year ago?
Yeah, because for me, at the time I was in Arizona, so by the time I woke up, Zverev was already leading by a set and a break. I think it was already a break up in the second set.
Hmm.
And I started to watch the match, and it really looked hopeless because Daniil, I don't know why he was staying too close to the baseline that day. He wasn't really returning from far back, because that's what Zverev was struggling a lot with, especially when he's hammering the first serve at 135, 140 miles an hour. Medvedev
Hmm.
is he's sort of the best returner that way, and that's when Zverev figured out, okay, he should deliberately start to roll in the second serve at like 80, 85 miles an hour. He did that in the round robin match that got him really close, because Medvedev, I remember, he almost it he had a break point to serve it out in the second set, and the tiebreaker again he unraveled because of the foot fault. He didn't like that call, but he did well obviously to keep it together. He saved a couple of break points in the third for Zverev to serve out the match, but I was not really surprised, because Medvedev, he seemed like he was tired. Um, there's a match
It just seemed
that
flat to me. I don't know whether it was motivation, tired, a bit of everything.
maybe it was very similar to how Novak was flat in the 2018 final, and
Hmm.
also how I would say Team was in the Madrid final when he played Zverev. Again, same score line, pretty much the same trajectory. Uh, Team was the heavy favorite. I still cannot like wrap my head around that result, because he's beaten Nadal. He's done something that was unthinkable. Nadal was playing some scary tennis during that
Hmm.
clay swing, and it started from Rome from the previous year. He hadn't dropped the set until that match from RG 2017 all the way to Madrid 2018, and he was playing some amazing tennis. It was scary, even the prospect of facing him, and I don't know how he just ended. And look at his matchup against Zverev as well. He's so superior. He's like 8-3 against him.
Yeah.
So and two of those losses have come on the same court as Madrid. Okay, granted, the last time they played, team was not really anywhere near his best. He was coming back from a 4 or 5 week break, and he lost early at the Australian Open. He was not really. He even
Beginning of
opened
last
up
year, yeah.
about motivational issues, but
Mhm.
same way, I think Medvedev sort of bossed Zverev for quite a bit from Paris 2020 all the way to Turin the following year. So it was really surprising to me. And like you mentioned, you could, in hindsight, you could chalk it back to that match. But I thought before he faced Nadal, I thought, okay, maybe it was similar to how Novak in 2018. He did lose Paris, and he did lose in the final of Paris and London. Again, he was pretty flat in both of the matches. He lost in straight sets. And then he turned it up in the Australian Open, especially the final. That display was just out of this world. And of course, Medvedev was not playing that well, but he was playing well enough that he should have seen through that match. I just don't know what happened. I mean, it's just hard to describe in words. I mean, that final was everything. It was a roller coaster. There was some great tennis for sure. It started to look like Nadal was the physically superior player, which was shocking because he was out for 6 months, just recovered from COVID, and you wouldn't have given a chance even otherwise, really, if when he was 2 sets down, because he doesn't have that great of a record from 2 sets down.
Agree. Just a
But
second. We'll come to
yes,
that match in a second. I want to actually bring us to the present, and then we'll
mm-hmm.
wind back perhaps to that match. We're
Sure,
we're
sure.
obviously going to mainly focus on Medvedev's year. We did a bit on obviously the Lever Cup and Medvedev as a player as a whole, and his improvements over the last 3 or 4 years. But let's just look at the last, say, 3 or 4 weeks, because we went into the US Open, I felt, with lots of doubt surrounding him. I
Mm-hmm.
have to say, when it comes to Medvedev and the US Open, the match he had against Wu made me think, hang on a second, maybe everything's okay. Maybe we're back in New York. The feelings of 2019, the feelings of 2021 are going to return. I thought he
Mm-hmm.
was really good in that match. Maybe it was just a favorable matchup for him in terms of the long rallies, and eventually he
Mm-hmm.
would always end up on top with
Mm-hmm.
those long rallies. But then Kyrgios comes along, and we knew Kyrgios was going to be a tough match. But again, when he wins that second set, I thought, okay, everything's going to be fine now for Daniil. I actually was starting to get more and more optimistic with every match he was playing, thinking, okay, I'm not necessarily thinking he's going to win the tournament, but the previous 9 months, and we mentioned Australia, and we will come to that shortly, seemed to be banished somewhat. But then it
Mm-hmm.
all unraveled against Kyrgios.
Yes, it did. I mean, like that's another match which very similar to the match against Steph in Cincinnati. If you look at the first 3 sets, especially, not
Uh-huh.
just the score, but the first set, Daniel had one set point on his own serve. Again, the second serve, he just didn't do much with it. And Kyrgios just stepped in and he pumped the backhand down the line on the return. And okay, sure, he had a couple of more set points, and Nick also was starting to slowly unravel himself. So that the first set was key. Had Medvedev won it, and the way the second set went, regardless, he went 5-1 up. He served for the set. He was 30 love up, and then it got complicated needlessly. Got to deuce at 5-3, and he closed it out. Uh, that's when I thought, okay, fine, he closed it out. Hopefully, he starts to take authority of the match, but he just didn't. And like getting broken from 40 love in the third set, I think that just kind of sums up. These are patterns that we've been seeing quite a bit in this match. It's like he's 40 love up or like love 40 up on the opponent's serve. He just doesn't see it through. He just does something,
Mhm.
or okay, sure, the opponent's gonna obviously when an opponent's love 40 or 40 love up, 40 love down, regardless, they're going to swing freely. They're going to try to connect some shots and they're going to see what's going to happen. But it seems like he sort of got rattled by it. I remember Kyrgios hit a ridiculous winner in that game from love 40 love when Medvedev was 40 love up, and that sort of got into his head. There were a couple of double faults as well, if I remember correctly, from that same game, and he just got broken. Okay, fine, he loses the third set, but the fourth set, I mean, he was just flat, and like Kyrgios was he just hit a purple patch, sure, but someone like Medvedev, world number one, defending champion, you wouldn't really expect him to fizzle out the way he did, and he just sort of He started flagging, and he didn't really know what to do. Okay, sure, he can. I think he served more, like a couple of more aces than Kyrgios did, but then again, he didn't do much with the second serve, and like I don't know why he's trying the kick serve. It's not even really fully developed. He used to go for the slice serve down the tee quite a bit, and he's just sort of gotten rid of that. He either goes tries to go big on the second, or he just tries to use the kick serve, and it's just not working. And he's having these double fault yips, which is
Hmm.
starting to get concerning now. And I think his game, it's never really been about his game. It's whenever he's declined, it's all mental for him. Even the decline he had in 2020, I think his game was there. We saw that match against Team. There were two sets which were on his racket pretty much, and he just lost that match in straight sets.
Hmm.
So it's just about when he starts to believe, when he thinks that he's the favorite and he's the one who's going to uh, dictate the points, and he's gonna eventually win the match. When he believes, I think that's great for him and scary for the opponents. But at this point in time, he just lacks a lot of that belief, and opponents can see right through that.
I think
So
Srihari, I think you've raised two really good points, and Gary's got a really good question, and yeah, I think it's a good time to sort of think about this as a whole. Actually, we'll come back to sort of answering Gary's question specifically in a second, but I want to sort of mention what you said. Two things that you said. He didn't know what to do in one particular match. I forget which one it was you were talking about. I think it was probably the Kyrgios one. And that does seem to be a theme that when things are running away from him, he doesn't necessarily know how to change the direction of the match. I remember against Rafa in 2019, not in the final at the US Open. I'm actually thinking about the ATP finals when
yeah,
Rafa starts to come back at him in the third set, and it looked like he sort of looked like a rabbit in headlights. Also, you talked about the confidence thing. I think it's huge that we have seen with him going on big streaks like in 2019, like in 2021 to some extent. Basically, in 2021, obviously he wins the US Open, beating Djokovic. He gets to Paris Bercy final, losing to Djokovic in an amazing final. He then gets to the final at the ATP Finals. And we see that's a good body of work, if you like, over three very important tournaments, albeit he lost in two finals. But he does seem to there does seem to be sort of a no middle ground. There doesn't seem to be the ability to stem the tide. We see it with Djokovic and Nadal and to some extent Federer all the time, but even other players, Alcaraz or even Yannick Sinner, that
hmm
they are problem solvers, if you like. It doesn't seem as though he has this in his arsenal at the moment, at least.
yeah, it doesn't. You're right. And like you said, it's sort of a seesaw. Either he's dominating, he's quite a streaky player in that sense. He's either dominating, he's beating every player in his way, or he just, I think last year was quite balanced, and I thought, okay, maybe this is the norm for him now, where, okay, sure, we did see him lose a couple of finals and even in the semis of Cincinnati, obviously unfortunate events where he ran into a camera, could have done what Rafa and Andy Roddick did, winning the whole US Open series, the two Masters and the US Open. But it seemed like a more balanced year, even with his issues in the crazy season. Coming back from COVID, he lost early in Madrid and Rome, did really well at RG. That match
Yeah,
against Garin was amazing. He even
yeah,
beat Tommy Paul in the second round, who's
yeah,
not really easy, especially on a surface he likes playing on quite a bit. He Even this year he almost took out Yannick Sinner, and he's had a few really good wins this year as well against Zverev and against Alcaraz as well, obviously in Montreal. So he can be a tricky player. Obviously, Bublik, sometimes sure he can't be serious, but always a dangerous prospect. So he was quite balanced, and I thought, okay, this is how it's going to be. But see, now that we see this decline, I'm having to think of more about 2020 and 2019 rather than 2021, because he was overall quite consistent, and that's what got him to world number two. He even finished world number two. But right now, it just seems like, okay, he needs to go on this streak and just gain quite a bit of points if he wants to finish maybe in the top three this year, which I think, by the way, is still possible, at least on paper, because he's more likely to uh, gain a lot of points than, say, Casper Ruud. Not underestimating him at all, but if you were to pit them against each other, on these conditions, indoor hard courts, really fast playing courts, you would really like Medvedev's chances. But then
yeah.
again, it's a question about how much he believes in himself, and maybe if he has a reboot like he did, there was a parallel that I drew where in 2020 he lost to Kevin Anderson in straight sets in Vienna. Since then, he just completely turned the tables. Won Paris, won ATP finals, led Russia to the ATP Cup title and reached the final of Australia. So, um, I still think a comeback like that is on the cards, and his
He's got
tennis is
some
definitely there.
Medvedev's
But
got some
yeah,
points. Medvedev's got some points to defend, obviously in Paris, though, and
mhm,
I'm just thinking about. I mean, right now he's fifth in the race, if you like, so he's
yes,
still there or thereabouts.
hmm
Zverev is eighth, by the way, and I don't think he'll be there for obviously for injury reasons, so that
yeah, it doesn't seem like
may play a little bit of a part. But
it.
players like Taylor Fritz, who's 10th in the race right now, you'd think has still got a chance of making it
Yes,
to Turin. And yeah, his pace is not assured, but with 3,300 points, he'd probably be okay in terms of making it there. But I mean, just talking about his year as a whole. I mean, actually, no. Before we get to his year as a whole, what about this result the other day against Wawrinka? Is that good for Wawrinka? Is it bad for Medvedev, or as often is the case, a bit of both?
it is. It should be maybe a bit of both. I'm leaning more towards not a very good result for Medvedev.
Uh-huh.
Wawrinka is still definitely sort of in his twilight. I don't think this really means much for him, maybe because nothing to do with his abilities. I think he still has a lot of issues physically. He even retired in the semis of Mets, right? So, like I said, I can see a lot of similarities with that loss to Anderson because Anderson retired, I think, this year, right? He didn't really do much. Sure, he won a title in Newport, but that's about it. Um, so, yeah, I think it's a bad loss, but I still still want to believe it's not the end of the world. He still has these tournaments where he has been successful at. Title. He's won a title and reached the final back to back. Of course, we could have said the same thing at the U.S. Open and the tournaments leading up to them, but that was sort of lackluster for him.
But
Not
in
bad
12 months,
losses there
in
to
12
have.
months, Srihari, since the US Open, he's won one tournament, if I'm right, and that was that
Lost track of
250.
yes.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
Yeah, so definitely very much like, I mean, of course, 2020 was largely abbreviated because of the pandemic, but again, he had a pretty long title drought. I think it was St. Petersburg or Shanghai, sorry, that he won in 2019, and the Paris title was the next title that he won. So I
And
still think it's on the cards, but maybe he probably has to go back to the drawing board. Pressure is off now. He's not in the top two or even top three, but he would want to at least finish in the top four for this season, and at least if not win any titles, like get some good wins and make a couple of finals like he did last year, and maybe he is on his way back. But I think in large part, it's hard to not think about the Australian Open final and how
absolutely.
that has oh yeah, that image. Every Nadal fan has had this as their header, that scoreline. And
Yeah,
for
but
me to
let's
see
let's
that,
let's have it on from the Medvedev perspective, at least for today, anyway. I mean, yeah, we'll give Nadal his due many times again in the future, but
yeah,
I know what
he
you mean.
deserves
It is a big moment for Nadal and his fans, but but this. I mean, I talked to you about ATP finals and stuff, but basically his trajectory over 6 months, and you could even say over 3 years, it has been upward and upward and upward, particularly on a hard court anyway. But
yes,
even 2021 Roland Garros, I think it was a plus, really, considering where he was before that. So anyway, we get to this point, the exact point that I'm showing on the screen right now, and everything could not be better for Daniil Medvedev. He's inching closer. In fact, if he'd have won this match, he would have taken the world number one spot. So he's on the verge of being world number one. He's on the verge of winning his first, or sorry, his second major. He's also on the verge of being, I think, the first person to follow, I think, in history, in tennis, in the ATP history, and certainly in the Open era, he was on the verge of becoming the first man to win his first major and then follow it up by winning the next one.
yes,
Um, so much is there, and so much is so close. Of course, if he'd have won this game, he'd have just had to hold serve a couple more times. And
yep,
bearing in mind how well he was serving in the match until that point, things were looking pretty good. And then it
yes,
started to unravel. And so did his year, Srihari. I mean, within 3 weeks, he's playing in Acapulco against the same opponent. But let me tell you that match wasn't competitive. Nadal just wiped him off the court. I do think Nadal's tennis even went up another notch in Acapulco. It is a
Yes.
tournament he likes. But from this moment onwards, it does seem as though Medvedev's year unraveled.
Yes, it did. And I think in large part the Acapulco match as well, 0 of 11 break points. Um, that was the key stat. And
True.
I think he could not help but think about the Australian Open final. That definitely Medvedev is not a player who really, I mean, what do you call it? Accentuates his emotions, if that's
I know.
an apt thing to say, because you really cannot say if he's heartbroken or if he's overjoyed, because he's stoic for most part. He has this sort of badass assassin vibes to him for a long time, and that's largely reason why a lot of people love him, because he brings something different,
Yeah,
not just
definitely.
tennis wise but attitude wise as well.
Yeah,
It just
definitely.
seems like this guy who he's here to win, and he does not hide that, and once he wins it's just like he's going about his job. But here, and especially at the trophy ceremony, he seemed shattered.
Yeah,
He couldn't really hold it together in the speech as
agreed.
well. He tried to smile through the pain, and he gave a long monologue which I think was really sad to hear at the beginning of the press conference.
Yep.
um, and I think Jane has a really good point here. It was also the hostile crowds getting to him. I mean, there's one thing booing against a player, but apparently some of the chants that were rained down were "Go back to Russia," which I
Yep.
think that
Yep.
can really mess with somebody.
He was booed as he walked onto court that day in Melbourne.
Oh, okay, yeah.
I mean, there's one thing supporting Nadal, and we all understand that for obvious reasons. But to,
Hmm.
to just boo the guy, and he'd probably said a couple of things maybe in the build up in some encore interviews afterwards. But we know how it is, and we saw how he turned it around in New York. But it is a different
Yes.
crowd in New York. I think they are a bit more flexible, perhaps. But in general, I thought it wasn't great. But then, having said that, I remember I think there was I think he made an unforced error. Maybe he hit the ball into the net, and then he react in the final. That was, and this is when the tide was turning, if you like. And he did
Hmm.
react to the crowd by, I think he was upset the fact that they cheered his unforced error. Um,
Yep.
but listen, so I have a lot of sympathy for him. Um, but then it was against Rafa,
Yeah.
and I said, I think I wrote a tweet after that final, or maybe even the next day, saying, "Daniel, don't worry, your time will come where you get plenty of love from the crowd because
Hmm.
he's just too funny, too cool, too interesting, and too different,
Exactly.
as you say, not to get it."
Exactly. Yeah. And for me, yeah, that was, as a Medvedev fan, that was really devastating. Those 24 hours were tough, but I just, maybe one day he'll lift the Australian Open title and he'll look back at this final and he'll be like, oh yeah, look how far we've come, or what do you call it? He'll probably finally get rid of the monkey off his back, because I just hope this doesn't turn into one of those. Let's say the McEnroe versus Lendl final, I think it was 1984 in Roland Garros.
Okay.
McEnroe was up 2 sets, maybe even up a break, I
Yeah.
think, in the third set. I just hope it does. And McEnroe never won the
Right.
Roland Garros. So
Yeah.
I definitely don't think
McEnroe's
that's the
talked
case
about
with
McEnroe's
Daniil,
talked
because
about how
he's just,
painful that final
yeah,
was.
it shouldn't be the case with Daniil, because it's not like he's never going to get a chance. It's his favorite surface. He's
Hmm.
made the final twice.
Hmm.
And again, there's one thing I do want to say is that there are a lot of parallels that I see between his career and Andy Murray's career.
Okay.
Uh, Especially so far, sure, he's accumulated a couple of plates already in Melbourne. First slam was at the US Open. Won the ATP finals already, and they struggle. Both of them struggle at Indian Wells. Andy Murray, for a large part of his career until he turned 28, did not make a final on clay. Sure, Medvedev already has a final in Barcelona, but I do think it's only a matter of time. He can play on the surface. Sure, it's not going to be his best surface. He probably won't win the Roland Garros ever, but I do think he can make another big run, maybe the semis or finals, and he could win a title or two for sure. I mean, he's played Madrid maybe what, once in his career. I don't even think, I don't know if he played in 2018 or even 2019, to be honest. But those conditions suit him well. it rewards big servers, and he's as someone who hits the ball pretty flat as well. If he's hitting his ground strokes well, he can give himself a chance at the title. I don't see why not. So I see his trajectory is something that's very similar to Andy Murray's at this point.
Hmm.
And of course, hopefully, he had a huge missed opportunity at Wimbledon as well last year. I definitely think he would have made the final had he gotten past Hurkacz, because
Hmm.
Federer was not really in shape to compete.
Yeah,
And knowing, how classy he is, he's never retired from a match ever, and he
yeah,
was not going to withdraw from a Wimbledon quarterfinal.
no,
So
definitely not.
sure, Medvedev again, he would have probably won that. Berrettini is a pretty good matchup for him overall. Sure, he would have maybe dropped the set, but I don't see him losing that.
Hmm.
And Novak and Daniil in the final, who knows what would happen, right? Because
Yeah.
Daniil likes that matchup, and he really played well on the grass, especially that tournament. I mean, the draw was Struff, Alcaraz, and Cilic just to get the fourth round.
Hmm.
So again, grass, and he had some good results this year as well. A couple of finals, in Mallorca, not Mallorca, sorry, in Netherlands and also in Halle. So yeah, so I think sure it's a bit of a slump, but all in all, I would say that you know when everything's said and done as far as his career is concerned, he's going to have the resume of an all-time great for sure. I have no doubts about that.
Okay, I'm a little bit more less optimistic than you are, Shrihari. I
Mhm.
see. Talking of we sort of touched on the problem-solving issue earlier, and he's got a few problems to solve at the moment.
Mhm.
One, of course, is his form. We mentioned it. Basically, in the last 12 months, he's won one title,
Yeah.
and he's also he's not. It's not like he's getting to semis and finals a lot. I know he got to the semis where he lost to Tsitsipas recently in I think it
Hmm.
was in Cincinnati, wasn't it? So
Yes.
but generally he's often quite often going out early,
Hmm.
like he did last week, an ATP 250 to Medvedev. Was it Metz? I think, wasn't it, where that
Yeah.
tournament was in France? So
It's time.
so
Yes.
that's the first thing. Second thing is in terms of his game and in terms of I remember in that Nadal final. I mean, perhaps it was more the analysis afterwards when I realized it rather than the actual moment. But seeing him get caught in no man's land so often and not really knowing what to do and maybe sort of erring back towards the back of the court, and Nadal was just killing him at certain moments because his court positioning was off, shall we say, because he didn't get back into position or he didn't stay at the net or whatever. And then I
Yes.
think his biggest problem to solve, even bigger than the form and even bigger than some of those tactical issues, if you like, or even technical, is I think that he, like Zverev, like Tsitsipas, like okay, Dominic Thiem has been gone for a while, and we hope he can come back. But like that group of players that were the next gen. Okay, Tim was a bit older, but that
Hmm.
group, and I'm probably missing one from that group. I'm just trying to think. But that group of players that were all going to be the people that were to take over from the big three,
Hmm.
well, they will be overtaken, if not already, by Alcaraz very, very soon by
Yeah.
Sinner and even Felix. We saw Felix have a great weekend. I
Yeah.
did a show about a month ago, maybe a bit more, with those three
Hmm.
basically being neck and neck with
Yeah.
Tsitsipas et al. And now I
Hmm.
think they're ahead of those guys. And so that's the biggest problem that Medvedev is going to have because suddenly he's going to go into Australia next year rather than being
Hmm.
one of two or three favorites like he was this year.
Hmm.
Djokovic will probably be back, and I'm
Hmm.
sure he's as motivated as ever.
Hmm.
Nadal will still be there if he's fit, and let's hope he is. But you're also going to have Alcaraz, and you're going to have Sinner. I also
Hmm.
think that Tsitsipas maybe can, he's a bit younger than Medvedev, and I do think that he may yet return to form, although it has been a while for him. So
Yep.
this is going to be a problem for Medvedev and
Hmm.
Felix as well. So he could, if his form doesn't pick up, if he doesn't win a tournament for the rest of the year, or at least if he doesn't win Paris and he doesn't win the ATP finals, which I think right now it seems very unlikely he'll win either, he could well go into Australia having not won a title or won one title in 18 months.
Hmm.
On top of that, he'll go in as sixth or seventh favorite.
Yeah, could be. If not favorite, at least maybe outside the top five seeding wise, and we could end up getting a rematch of maybe last this year's final in the quarterfinal, or we
Exactly.
could get someone like
He could have a
Alcaraz.
Nadal, Djokovic, Alcaraz run in the quarters onwards, if you
Yeah,
like.
that's true. From that perspective, I definitely agree with you. Obviously the fan in me would like to be optimistic as always. Sometimes, sure, it's easy for me to get bogged down. Like I was quite bogged down after that Wawrinka loss. I was like, where were we not very long ago, and look where we are now. So
Hmm. Hmm.
uh, that was sort of the feeling I got. But I definitely agree with you. But let's look at it from this perspective. I don't mean to be negative, but let's say he's probably done winning big titles like he did, at least from his perspective. If you look at his journey, he had to his contemporaries in large part were Zverev and Tsitsipas. Right, sure. Team is more, I would say, more of a rival to him as far as accomplishments goes, because both of them are Grand Slam champions. But yeah, you see Zverev and Tsitsipas, he's played them so many times. I think he's played both of them like more than 10 times. And those two were definitely more touted to win multiple slams and be the future world number ones. uh, but Medvedev was not really much in the discussion until he was like sort of climbing his way up. He qualified through Tokyo and he won there, and then out of nowhere, really, he makes the final. Montreal backs it up, winning Cincinnati, beating Novak, and then there's that U.S. Open final run. He was pretty much a zombie there. Like he said, he was on painkillers the whole time. He was down a set and a break to Dominic Kepfer in the fourth round, and in the quarterfinal, he played an amazing match against Wawrinka, almost on the verge of retirement, I think, after the third set. But he saw that through. And again, he played really well against Dimitrov. Thought, okay, maybe he's losing to Rafa in straight sets. I was like, okay, first Grand Slam final. Novak lost his first Grand Slam final in straight sets. Uh, so did Andy Murray. But I was like, okay, and so did Dominic Thiem. Let's, talk about players closer to him. So I was like, okay, it's not bad. But then the way he, changed the dynamics of that match, and we
Yeah,
saw Nadal in a dogfight in the fifth
I was
set,
at
from
I was
two
at that
breaks
match
up.
in New York. I was at it.
Yeah,
Mm.
from two breaks up, and he's finding himself facing break point for 5-all
I
for
know it was a
Medvedev to draw level.
listen. I mean,
Yeah,
Nadal was almost collapsing in a way. He
yeah, he
just couldn't get
was,
over the
and
line.
that win meant so much to him. If you see Nadal, he was just
Oh,
in tears the whole time.
yeah,
So that was a huge win for him. And you saw Daniil, he just took it on the chin, and
yeah.
and the losses towards the end of that season had more to do with him being fatigued more than anything else.
Okay.
Came back 2020, and if you look at his trajectory again, 2020 was written off. They thought, okay, he fluked those titles, he fluked the wins, but he just took the tennis world by storm again, and he had a really good solid season overall in 2021, all the way till the Australian Open final this year, where it's just since when he's hit a slump. So if you look at it from that perspective, regardless of what happens from now, I think he's had a career that he can be really proud of. He's the accomplishments that he's gained are what many players would dream of while entering the pro circuit. He's been a Grand Slam champion. He's been world number one. He's won the ATP finals. That's probably, yeah, the biggest title you could win after a Grand Slam. The best 8 players in the world competing, and how he won it. He beat the top 3 players to win it, and
Yeah.
nobody's done that. Uh, that is beating the top 3 to win the ATP finals, and he's won 4 other Masters titles. So I think he would really be proud of what he's achieved, regardless.
I
Uh,
do think, Shriri, though, when he was going on a good run in Australia in 2021, when he got to the final and lost to Novak, I think it may have been after he won the semi-final, which I think was against Tsitsipas in
yes.
Australia. And so just on the eve of the final, I was thinking this guy could well win 5+ slams.
Mhm.
I wasn't expecting him to ever win in France, and as you said earlier, probably he won't. But he's going to be so good in Australia and at the US Open for the next 5 years that he could easily
Mhm.
pick up 4, 5, 6 of those titles.
Yes.
What I would do now, though, is I would be downing that
Hmm.
expectation to probably one more, maybe. I mean, listen, these things evolve. In six
Yes,
weeks, he could
exactly.
go and clean up and have a great hardcore end of the season and go into Australia full of confidence. So, but I'm just saying that optimism about 5+ slams that I had back then has been tempered somewhat by this year.
Yes. Opinions always change over time, and you can only work with the data that you have and the events that have transpired, right? Of course, we love to speculate. Uh, I appreciate it, Gary. Thank you. Um,
Gary's a Djokovic fan, by the way. I don't know if you knew that.
oh, that's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
more the merrier. But yeah, so yeah, obviously, like I said, opinions are largely based on stats that you have and events that transpire. So, I wouldn't really blame you for lowering that bar, lowering that expectation right now, and, having a more modest
Mm,
prediction of what his career is going to pan out to be. Again, these are discussions that we can always have and fruitful ones, as long as we don't have, like on Twitter, people, when somebody doubts Medvedev, saying, oh, yeah, he's done, he's only a one slam wonder, he's one surface wonder. And then you bring up some of his results outside of hard courts, then they would say, "Oh yeah, he beat Wawrinka on grass. So what? Wawrinka's horrible on grass. Oh, so what if he made the final of Barcelona? He got absolutely destroyed by Dominic Thiem. There's always going to be counters that are sort of, in a way, unhealthy and just badly motivated. I think the
yeah.
conversation we had right now was really healthy, really good. Of course, we have a bit of differing opinions, but I think these are the kinds of conversations we should be having, and we can have moving forward. And
But
obviously, from,
Twitter
from
extremes, Srihari. I mean, as you
Mhm.
say, 1 minute it's all over. The next minute he's going to win 10 slams, and
Exactly,
you know
that's
that.
always going to be the case. I mean, even with the guys like Rafa, Roger, and Novak, you know Novak, okay, he loses RG and to Rafa in that fashion, and you wonder, okay, has he lost that fire in him, because it was a complete 180 compared to what it was last year in the semis, the way he competed until the last point. Here he just sort of fizzled out. He's set in two breaks down in pretty much no time. He's so flat, and then he's just. I don't think Rafa would have really dropped the set that day if it wasn't for someone like Novak, who has, beaten him 30 times and inflicted all of those losses on him, because he was playing that well. Of course, Novak put himself in a position to at least push it to a fifth set, and he should have done that. But yeah, even with them, you tend to doubt. Or a better example would be in 2018 after he lost to Chekinado. Who would have predicted that we had won 9 slams after, right?
Yeah, right.
So even for me, it was pretty hard. Modest prediction would be another three or four. But how
Mm,
far he's come, how Rafa has come from 2017, where he had 14, to add eight more from there, just phenomenal.
yeah.
Um, right.
Nice
And
comment there, Gary. Yeah, a little bit of balance there, and it's always good to have. Before we finish this sort of Medvedev chat, and it is related. Funny enough, I just randomly wrote down when I was talking and listening to some of the things we were talking about earlier as well. I also wrote down Casper Ruud's name, because I do feel as though he is someone that may look back on the two major finals he had this year and
mhm,
think, okay, I do think that he was more or less at his peak, if in terms of what we've seen so far from his career in the US Open. I think, with the exception of a 5 minute spell, when it, in that tiebreak, when it just was just like, it was like somebody, a new person took over his body for 5 minutes, because he was so bad in the tiebreak against Alcaraz. But my fear with Casper Ruud is that, like, he's improved certain parts of his game this year. His serve is much better, in particular. But I don't know where Casper Ruud. And I know it's funny, because Casper Ruud is on the crest of a wave, so to speak. Medvedev is in a slump. And yet
yes.
my thoughts about both players are, I don't know where either of them go. And I shouldn't be so
Mhm,
negative about Ruud, given how amazing his year has been in so many respects. I saw him
mhm,
interviewed the other day, and he was asked, like, if I'd said to you at the beginning of the year, Casper, that you're going to make two major finals, what would you say? And Casper's response was, I would think you were crazy. I would be asking, do I win either of those two finals? Because you're telling me I'm going to be in two major finals next year, for
right, right.
example, and I go, oh, okay, great. Do I win one? No,
Mhm,
sorry, you get pummeled by Rafa in Roland Garros. Oh, okay. What about the other one? You lose to the next best thing, and the new best thing, if you like. Sorry, and and my problem with both Alcaraz and Medvedev is, I just think that they could well get swarmed. I mean, I even think Djokovic and Nadal are you know, must be thinking, boy, I've got to play my best tennis next year if I'm going to win a major,
Yes,
which
exactly.
hasn't been the case for almost a decade, basically, that they've not
Hmm.
necessarily always had to play their best tennis and win majors.
Yes, not always, yeah, but when they had to, they've
Sure.
just really, gone up several notches. Like look at Novak in that RG final against Tsitsipas. Look at even Rafa. Like I don't want to touch up too much on Medvedev and the way he capitulated, but the way Rafa raised his game in that Australian Open final, we probably aren't likely to see that ever again from either of them. A lot
Right.
of parallels as well. They're two sets down, and they what do you call it? It's
At
similar
their
set
worst
scores as
slam, at
well.
their worst slam as well in terms of stats.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And the second, the going for the double career slam, respectively, both of them. So, uh, right, it's as far as Casper Ruud's concerned, I think the way he played against Alcaraz, no one, I didn't give him much of a chance. I thought maybe much of a chance more than taking a set or two. I didn't envision any scenario where he was going to win, and
I mean,
he
I just
was.
thought he had to play his absolute best and hope
Yeah,
that Alcaraz didn't approach his best. I think
exactly.
Alcaraz probably still had another gear somewhere. Maybe a bit of fatigue was involved there, but I
Mm-hmm.
think Alcaraz was close to his best, but not his best. But
Mm-hmm.
he needed Alcaraz to come down another notch, really, to really have a good chance of winning. I like this comment as well from Gary. And listen, your friend Gary was certainly ahead of me in this prediction, because I would say until 2011, I didn't see anything even close to Novak's career. I probably, with Novak, watching him do well, be competitive, be a really good player on the tour who would obviously pick up titles, may get a major. And he did, of course. I think it was '08 he won in Australia, his first major.
Yep.
But that was like, okay, cool. Yeah. And he might go on to win two or three more. Um, I didn't see Novak as being this mental monster that he became over the next decade or so, or from say 2011 onwards. Um, yeah, that's hats off to him. So well done to your friend Gary for making that prediction. Any
Yep.
final comments, Srihari, on Medvedev before we bring this to a close?
Right. Yeah. My final comments would be, like we discussed, we can agree on one thing is that our predictions tend to fluctuate as to where his career is headed. Uh, Obviously, you have yours, I have mine, but I just want to close by saying that all hope is not lost, and I think it's all in his head. And once he starts to believe, once all he needs is one or two big wins. And if I'm not wrong, his last top 10 win was against Tsitsipas at the Australian Open. He hasn't had a top 10
Wow.
win since.
Mm,
I think that's what he needs to get going.
yeah.
And
Maybe he
it
just
could
needs to
very
play
much.
Tsitsipas. He just needs to play Tsitsipas on a hard court, maybe.
Exactly.
Again, I
That's
know he
all he
played him in
needs.
Cincinnati, but he
Yeah,
needs to play him again.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that's probably the best kind of match for him to. It could have happened in Cincinnati because it's in the that kind of form that he was. That is Medvedev, not anywhere near his best. Obviously, he could have. He has chances in the first set, up a break, and even had a set point in the tiebreaker. And the second set, of course, it was so absurd the way it ended. From like 5-love up, and then he's almost on the verge of losing both breaks and getting back on serve at 5-4. But I
Yeah.
think otherwise, I can definitely see him once he gets that big win against a high-profile player. Anybody, any player, it could be any player who's had a season better than he has had. Alcaraz or Nadal, maybe. I don't know if Nadal's even going to play the rest of the season, but someone
I'm
like
not sure.
Alcaraz may be a bit too steep. Rude, another player who he enjoys that matchup. I don't think he's lost a set in the 3 or 4 matches they played. And he just absolutely destroyed him in Turin last year. It could be Rude, it could be Tsitsipas, and that's all he needs. And he needs to believe that he belongs there again.
Yeah.
He once he gets rid of that imposter syndrome that he's sort of been carrying, is in that short stint of him being the world number one.
Mm,
I think he's
mm,
good to go from there. So let's
yeah.
see.
Hey, listen, we'll be paying close attention to him in the coming weeks, particularly in I think in Paris and at the ATP finals. If he could win one of those somehow, or as you say, even just get some big wins under his belt, that would change
Yes.
things entirely. Listen, Srihari, thank you very much for coming by.
Yeah. Thank you for having me on. I had an amazing chat.
My pleasure. And to the rest of the tennis world, thanks for stopping by.